The courtroom was packed. A heavy silence hung in the air, until the judge walked in. She was known as Judge Meredith Clark. Cold. Sharp. Always on schedule. And always convinced she was the smartest person in the room. She sat down, smoothed out her robe, and scanned the docket. Then she saw him. Next case, Tyrone Jacobs vs. State of Missouri. Defendant representing himself? She said, raising one eyebrow. A black man in a plain brown suit stood up. He looked calm. Hands folded in front. Quiet confidence in his posture. Yes, Your Honor, he said evenly. I will be representing myself. The judge stared for a beat too long. Then, she laughed. It wasn't loud. But loud enough. Some in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Others smirked. Mr. Jacobs, she said, voice dripping sarcasm, this isn't traffic court. We're discussing a civil liability claim involving over $200,000 in disputed restitution. Are you sure you want to do this without a licensed attorney? Yes, Your Honor, Tyrone replied. I'm very sure. Judge Clark leaned back, arms crossed. Well, you're either very brave, or very foolish. Tyrone didn't respond. He simply opened his file. Judge Clark motioned to the opposing attorney. A polished man in a blue suit stood up. Mr. Ellis, you may proceed, she said with a tight smile. Let's try to get through this, quickly. From the start, it was clear she wasn't even pretending to be neutral. She cut Tyrone off mid-sentence. She sustained every objection from the opposing counsel. She rolled her eyes, glanced at the ceiling, and at one point actually yawned while Tyrone was speaking. But Tyrone? He didn't flinch. He laid out facts, exhibits, witness statements. And every time she tried to rush him, he politely asked, Your Honor, may I finish? And she'd sigh, dramatically, and say, Fine. Go ahead. By mid-morning, something odd began to happen. Whispers. In the back row, a man leaned in and whispered to a woman. Do you recognize him? She narrowed her eyes. Wait, is that? Another spectator turned to her neighbor. I think I saw his name in a federal brief once. But Judge Clark? She didn't notice the murmurs. She was too busy smirking at Tyrone. Too busy believing she was in control. Too busy underestimating the man standing in front of her. A janitor. A mechanic. A nobody. That's what she thought. But she was wrong. She was so wrong. And in just a few minutes, she was about to find out exactly who Tyrone Jacobs really was. By the second hour, the air had changed. The gallery wasn't just watching, they were leaning in. But Judge Clark? She doubled down. Mr. Jacobs, she snapped, this is not a TED Talk. Kindly keep your comments relevant to the statute. Tyrone had been citing State v. Harrell, a precedent directly related to his case. He paused, adjusted his papers, and tried again. But she banged her gavel. Enough. You're wasting the court's time. From the prosecution's table, Mr. Ellis sat with his arms folded, smirking. Tyrone turned, quietly walked to the evidence table, and lifted a folder. Your Honor, if you'll allow, this is a signed copy of the agreement the state claims never existed. Judge Clark rolled her eyes. A photocopy? You expect me to consider that legitimate? No, Your Honor, Tyrone said calmly. The original's with the DOJ. They sent me this certified copy, along with a letter. I don't want to see a letter, she cut in. You're not a lawyer. You don't get to argue law. The room tensed. Even a junior clerk near the door looked uncomfortable now. Still, the judge continued. You should have hired someone who knew what they were doing, Mr. Jacobs. Honestly, it's almost cruel, watching you flail around like this. Tyrone stood silent. Still. Composed. Judge Clark took his silence as weakness. Let's be real, she said, voice rising just enough. This court sees people like you all the time, big dreams, no credentials. Coming in here thinking Google search qualifies you for federal litigation. No one spoke. You could hear someone's breath catch in the second row. But she wasn't done. She leaned forward, looked Tyrone dead in the eye, and said, "Let me give you some free legal advice. Walk away before you embarrass yourself further." Tyrone looked at her. Not angry. Not broken. Just patient. And then he spoke. "Your Honor," he said slowly, "with all due respect, I'm not the one embarrassing myself." A low gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Clark's jaw clenched. "Excuse me?" But Tyrone didn't repeat himself. Instead, he stepped aside and pressed a button on the court's projector system. A scanned contract appeared on screen, signed, dated, notarized. Judge Clark squinted at it. "I said no copies," she barked. But Tyrone simply said, "Please note the signature at the bottom. U.S. Attorney Melissa Tran. Dated 2 years ago. This agreement settled the matter the state is now trying to reopen." Mr. Ellis jumped up. "Objection! Overruled," Clark snapped. "Sit down." She stared at the screen again, this time less confident. "And Tyrone?" He turned one more page. Another document. A federal release order. "I'll also be submitting this," he said. "Per Article 14 of the DOJ agreement, this case has already been federally adjudicated." Judge Clark looked rattled. Only for a moment. Then she slammed the gavel again. "Recess. 15 minutes." She stood, robe flaring, and stormed into her chambers. The gallery buzzed. People turned to each other. Whispered. Someone even pulled out their phone, recording quietly. And Tyrone? He just walked back to his seat. Sat down. Waited. But outside the courtroom, something else was happening. A black SUV pulled up behind the courthouse. A woman in a navy pantsuit stepped out. Federal credentials flashing under the sun. She walked toward the security entrance. And she was not smiling. 15 minutes turned into 30. When Judge Clark finally returned, her robe billowed behind her like storm clouds. Her lips were tight. Her expression even tighter. But her eyes? Different. She'd seen something. She knew something. Still, she wasn't ready to give up control. "Court is back in session," she said, slamming the gavel harder than necessary. Tyrone stood. And before he could speak, she cut him off. "I've reviewed your documents," she began, clearly choosing her words like poison. "And while your effort is creative, this court finds the submission insufficient for dismissal." There was a pause. A full, stunned silence. Then Tyrone asked, steady as ever, "On what grounds, Your Honor?" Judge Clark's nostrils flared. "On the grounds that the agreement you reference is irrelevant to the present case. But it resolves the charges." "I said," she barked, "it's irrelevant." Her voice echoed off the wooden walls. Gasps. Murmurs. Then silence again. Even Mr. Ellis looked uncertain now. Judge Clark leaned forward. "I hereby rule to strike all exhibits submitted by Mr. Jacobs. Furthermore, I am referring this matter for immediate judgment." Tyrone's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, that's not procedure," he said. "That's not even legal." "Are you a judge?" she snapped. A long pause. "No," Tyrone said softly. "Exactly," she said, standing now. "You're a civilian wasting my courtroom's time. I warned you. You came in here thinking you could play lawyer. Well, this isn't a game." Then she leaned over her bench and added, "And I don't care who you think you know." Tyrone didn't move. But behind him, a door opened. Soft footsteps entered the courtroom. And then, "Judge Clark." A woman's voice. Firm. Cold. Measured. Every head turned. There she stood. Navy suit. Crisp white shirt. Gold DOJ badge at her hip. U.S. Attorney Melissa Tran. Judge Clark froze. "W.H., what is the meaning of this?" she asked, eyes narrowing. Tran held up a folder. "I'm here to observe the court proceedings in case number 4428. Tyrone Jacobs versus State of Missouri. You have no jurisdiction." "I do now," Tran said, stepping forward. As of 8:47 a.m. this morning, this case was flagged by the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. The room erupted. Someone dropped their phone. Another person whispered, "Civil rights?" Judge Clark looked pale. "Flagged? On what basis?" Tran stared straight into her eyes. "Alleged judicial misconduct, obstruction of federal preemption, and abuse of authority." Judge Clark laughed, shaky, nervous. "Abuse of authority? That's absurd. This man has no standing. He's not even a real lawyer." Tran didn't blink. "Incorrect. Mr. Jacobs graduated summa cum laude from Yale Law. Admitted to the bar in 2005. Clerked under the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Practiced law for over a decade before voluntarily surrendering his license." Silence. Stunned. Heavy. Complete. Judge Clark's voice came out as a whisper. "Voluntarily, why would he?" Tyrone finally turned around. Looked the judge in the eye. "I walked away to take care of my mother," he said. "She was dying. And the system didn't make space for people like us to be both lawyers and caregivers." Judge Clark swallowed hard. But Tran wasn't done. "Which is why the DOJ gave him temporary federal clearance under the Civil Rights Restorative Council initiative," she said. "He was acting fully within his rights. Every document submitted is legally binding." Tyrone stepped forward. Placed the final file on the judge's bench. "And that, Your Honor," he said, "is a motion to have you recused from this case." A beat of silence. Then the courtroom exploded. The courtroom was no longer silent. It buzzed. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs into gasps. Judge Clark didn't move. Tyrone stood tall. Calm. The motion for recusal rested neatly on her bench. Then, U.S. Attorney Tran placed her badge on the table and pulled out a printed statement. "This courtroom," she said clearly, "is now under formal review by the Department of Justice for potential violations of Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law." The words hit like a thunderclap. Section 242. Federal offense. Jail time. Judge Clark's lips parted, but no sound came out. Tyrone didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply turned to the gallery, then back to the judge. "I came in here to speak the truth," he said, voice steady. "Not to be dismissed. Not to be mocked. And not to be told that my presence, or my intelligence, doesn't belong. You didn't ask about my credentials, Judge. You made assumptions. You saw a black man without a tie and thought, easy target." She tried to interrupt. He raised a hand calmly. "You saw what you wanted to see. And you thought the robe gave you power to belittle me, erase evidence, twist the law." Then he pointed to the gallery. "But this courtroom is not your kingdom. And justice isn't a game." People started clapping. At first 1 or 2. Then 5. Then the whole room. Even the stenographer wiped her eyes and kept typing. Judge Clark sat, frozen. Melissa Tran leaned forward. "Effective immediately, Your Honor, you are being placed under administrative review. I've already contacted the Chief Judge. You'll step down from the bench while this case is reassigned." "No," Clark whispered. "You can't." But the bailiff was already moving. Gently. Respectfully. Escorting her off the bench. She stood. Shaking. Her voice cracked. "He tricked me. He baited me." Tyrone said nothing. He just picked up his file. And for the first time that day, he smiled. Not with arrogance. But relief. The courtroom door opened. Judge Clark walked out, not in control. Not triumphant. Not untouchable. Just small. Outside, cameras were already waiting. Reporters yelled questions. Flashes popped. Inside, U.S. Attorney Tran handed the judge's gavel to the bailiff. "Secure that," she said. "Chain of custody." Then she turned to Tyrone. "You good?" she asked, her voice now soft. He nodded. "Thanks for showing up." he said. She smiled. We don't let our own walk into lions' dens alone. As she walked out, someone in the crowd said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Man didn't just walk into court. He walked in like a storm. 3 weeks later, the courtroom looked different. Judge Clark's nameplate was gone. In its place sat Judge Rodriguez, interim, impartial, and deliberate. But it wasn't just the bench that had changed. The room carried a new energy. People looked around, whispered less, and listened more. And at the front, seated at the plaintiff's table, was Tyrone Jacobs. No longer in a plain brown suit. He wore a crisp black one now, with a small gold pin at the collar. He didn't have to represent himself anymore, though he still could have. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him sat civil rights attorneys. To his left, Melissa Tran. And behind them all, a packed room. Standing room only. People who'd heard what happened. People who came not for a verdict, but for a message. Justice mattered again. Judge Rodriguez reviewed the motion. This court acknowledges the prior suppression of evidence, as well as the violation of Mr. Jacobs' procedural rights under both state and federal law. She said calmly. The prior judgment is hereby vacated. Mr. Jacobs, restitution is ordered in your favor, plus damages. A beat. Then applause. Not wild. Not chaotic. Just steady. Solid. Like truth landing exactly where it belonged. Tyrone stood. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't gloat. He simply turned and nodded once toward the seat where Judge Clark used to sit. Where power used to be abused. Where silence used to mean surrender. But not today. Outside the courthouse, a reporter stopped him. Mr. Jacobs, any comment for the public? He thought for a second. Then said quietly, never mistake silence for ignorance. And never confuse humility for weakness. Another reporter chimed in. Will you be practicing law again? Tyrone looked to Melissa Tran, who gave a subtle nod. I never stopped, he said. But I'm not here to practice law. I'm here to fix it. Back inside, in a corner file room, a clerk slid a paper into a folder. A disciplinary action form. Marked Meredith Clark, suspended pending investigation, alleged judicial misconduct. It would be a long road for her. She was now the one pleading her case. Hoping someone would listen. Hoping someone would believe her. But the world had changed. And so had the courtroom. Weeks later, a mural went up outside the courthouse. A silhouette of a man in a brown suit, holding a file in one hand. Below it, for words. He spoke. She fell. And under that, smaller text. Justice doesn't wear a robe. It walks in truth.